Hi, I'm Warrick from Harder and Steenbeck, and today we're going to build a beautiful workspace where we can maximize our creativity and have no hassle because we're missing something that we suddenly discover that we need right in the middle of our process. The first thing that you're going to want to have is a nice cutting mat or some kind of a mat to cover your table. My recommendation is don't ever clean this because it's a beautiful piece of evidence of everything that you've done in all of your creative endeavors. So as you can see, this one has lots of evidence of past projects, and I think it sets the scene rather nicely for the creative experience. When you sit down, puts you in the right frame of mind. Probably the most important thing that we have to think about before we get into the fun stuff is we've got to really think about our health. Now, the airbrush does create airborne particulates. We don't really want to be breathing them in. And there's some very simple steps that you can take for very, very low cost to mitigate this problem. The first one is you really must have, and I really mean this, you must have a spray out pot. I don't recommend that anybody airbrushes without having one of these to hand. The reason why they're so fantastic is when you're airbrushing, so much of the airborne particulate that you can make is made when you're flushing out the remainder of a color before a color change, or when you're spraying out the cleaner that you're using to clean the airbrush up in between color changes. And these little gadgets manage that overspray perfectly. What do you need from a good spray out pot? You need a rubber seal where you put the airbrush in to do the spray out because you don't want to damage the front of your airbrush. The second thing that you really want is you want to make sure that the exhaust, which is where the air that you're spraying in is going to exit from, has a filter. So if we pop this one open, you can see it has a little filter inside of it, and that is what traps the residues of what you're spraying out in there. Typically they have a baffling system inside here, and that is to convert that spray into liquid that then drops down and fills the base of the spray out pot. Absolutely invaluable little gadget, an absolute must-have. I'm going to put it over there as we start to build our space. Staying on the topic of looking after yourself, if you don't have the space or the budget to invest in a spray booth, don't worry about it. I think that they're great to have if you're undergoing a lot of very intensive projects where you're pulling big trigger movements to paint large things. If you're not doing that, make sure that your space is well ventilated, whether it be through a window or an open door or a fan, bringing air in from some other area. And if you don't have any of those available, then please consider the use of a respirator. Speaking just for myself personally, I'm not a big fan of these because they can be somewhat uncomfortable, but I would say that if you're doing a big priming job or something like that, where you're just going to be spraying a large volume of paint, it's definitely something sensible to think about using. You've only got one set of lungs, you can't get a new one, so look after the set that you've got. Now, of course, because we're an airbrushing channel, we're going to talk about the airbrush. And the worst thing that can happen is that you can damage your airbrush by having it fall off your workspace. So an absolute slam dunk, absolutely cannot not have, is a good stand for your beautiful airbrush. We really like our tripod design because it's everything that you need and nothing that you don't. And you can reposition it anywhere on your workspace, unlike the clampable ones that stay at the edge of the table. This is a safer place to put your airbrush. So we're going to put that over there to the right as we start to develop a workspace. Of course, you've also got to think about the compressor. Our recommendation for that is keep it under the table. If it's a compressor that's not silent, having it under the table just minimizes the noise that compressor is going to make, which again, all helps to craft the perfect environment for you to be creative in. The one thing that I would encourage you to take a little bit of time and thought into is the routing of your air hose. I've had so many friends have this problem when they're in the middle of a project, they decide to get up to get a coffee or the doorbell rings or something. They stand up to leave their workspace and they catch their foot on the air hose, pull the airbrush off the desk, it bashes into the wall, and then the whole session is lost and interrupted because the airbrush has gotten damaged. So I'd ask you to consider maybe just putting a couple of little clamps underneath the table so that your air hose is held up off the floor so that it comes from the back side of your table and up to your airbrush rather than trailing on the floor where that kind of an accident could happen. It's an invaluable tip. Please consider taking a bit of time to execute that in your studio. Sticking with the topic of the airbrush, it's absolutely critical that you don't find yourself mid-process and lacking something to take care of that precision tool. So I like to keep it really, really simple. One of the things that I really like to keep to hand when I'm airbrushing is I like to get some paper towel and I cut it down into slightly smaller squares like this, and I keep a pile of them to hand. What are these useful for? Well, it's a bunch of things. Chiefly is when you're changing color and you've sprayed out everything that's in your airbrush pot, there's still going to be some paint residue in there. Just throwing cleaner on top of that and spraying it out really means that you're spraying more through the airbrush than you need to, takes more time than just picking up some of this paper towel, popping it in there with your pinky finger and just wiping around in there to get out the most part of that paint that's a residue in the bowl. One cool thing that we've done with our airbrushes that I really like is we reprofiled the base of all of our cups to match the profile on the end of your pinky finger. And the reason why that's really important is you can now get almost all the paint out of the cup using your finger and a piece of paper towel. Really fast, speeds up the cleaning process massively. I like to keep those to hand for that purpose. Sticking with the cleaning idea, let's talk about how we actually get the residues that are remaining after the paper towel operation when we're doing a color change. There's two types of brush that I recommend to clean your airbrush with. Either use a size 4 to 6 dry brush, something like this, or use a larger brush if you're going to go with a conventional paintbrush, size 8 to 10. Why do we like the large brushes? People always ask this because they think that airbrush, fine, detailed, a small brush would be better. The truth is that you don't ever want to touch the airbrush, whether you're in the cup or around the head, with the ferrule of a paintbrush. Obviously it's hard, it's metal, might damage something. At the least, it'll put a little scratch, and when you put a little scratch in the airbrush, it just makes it a bit harder to clean next time. These big brushes are great because there's no danger of hitting anything with a ferrule, so you can be really aggressive with them. You can go like this to clean up your needle tip in your head. You can really kind of smoosh it around. You can jam it in the cup very aggressively like this to shift any residues in there. You don't have to be careful. You can be fast, and it all just helps to keep the creative juices flowing when you keep your workflow uninterrupted by things like cleaning, by making it really fast and really convenient. Of course, now we've got to talk about what kind of cleaner should we use. And the internet is full of people saying, I've got the secret sauce, the secret recipe of the magical cleaner that deals with everything. The reality is it's just not worth the risk. The people that make your paint are the best people to make the cleaner that cleans that paint. So my recommendation is, whatever paint system that you're using on that project, have the cleaner from the same paint brand to hand. Really important. Don't mix them. It'll just make aggravation and again, interrupt your workflow and your creativity. And that's what we're trying to build here, is something that optimizes that. So use the same cleaner from the paint brand that you're using on that project. Have it to hand. And that brings us neatly onto whatever the subject of your creativity is. Now, of course, what we want to do when we're painting a model, for example, canvases are a little bit different because it's kind of a self-contained object that doesn't need to be handled because you set it up to stand on its own. When you're dealing with a model, they can be a little bit awkward to handle, so we highly recommend a model painting stand that does two things. One, it holds the model securely so that you can set it down on your workstation and not be worried about whether or not it's going to topple. And two, that it's comfortable for you to hold and rotate so that you can get to all angles of that model and paint in whatever way that you want. It's worth taking the time to speak to some friends about which ones they think are the best before you invest your money in the one that you choose to purchase. We've got to think about how we protect our hands. Now, this is kind of a personal preference thing. Some people really feel that they want to paint with gloves. I've never been that person. I really prefer to see the evidence of my work, typically on the crook of my left hand, where you use it as a wiping spot for your needle or testing color before you put it onto the model. So I prefer to paint without gloves because I just like the feel of the airbrush in my hands without anything in between that. But if you don't want to have to worry about getting paint off your hands before you go back to work the next day, then you might want to consider painting with two gloves or perhaps just a glove on your non-painting hand. And of course, one of the things that's absolutely critical in any creative space is to be able to see what you're working on. Now, there's lots of ways that you can think about lighting your space, but especially when you're working in a relatively small area, I think probably the best solution to that is a good painting lamp. So we've got an example here, and let's just talk about what makes a good painting lamp. The first thing is is you want it to have a daylight temperature so that what you're looking at is real. You don't want to have other light colors coming in there that make it not quite exactly as it's going to represent when you take it away from the studio. You want it to be intense enough so that you can reorient the model to look at the effect of different positions of the master light source of how you're going to paint it. This can help you guide where your zenithal highlights are going to go. With that being said, let's now talk about some of the softer things that you need to make your creative space absolutely optimal. Painting is all about color. It's all about color. And so I think one of the very cool things you can do in a creative space is have your paints displayed where you can see them. There's nothing like having a palette available to see to inspire you as to what your next step is on whatever piece it is that you're painting. Organize your paints, display them in a way that you can see all of them at one go, and it's something that's quite inspiring to see all that color surrounding you. I think another critical thing to do is think about the people that you want to paint like. Think about the works that have inspired you. Take some time to go down to a print shop, make some good quality prints of these works, and put them up around your studio so that when you're thinking about what step to take next on this piece or that piece, you're able to lean back in your chair and consider the things that have inspired you and put you here in the first place. And I find it always fills in those gaps really nicely when you're not sure what to do next on a project. And the final thing to think about, of course, make sure that you've got a space for your phone or your tablet, because there's nothing like painting alongside a tutorial to help you make the most of your time to extend your skills as quickly as possible. With that being said, thanks for being with us once again. I'd like you to recommend this video to anybody who you think it will help. And other than that, we look forward to seeing you on the next one.